Hello, I'm Dr. Keith Burke. I am a professor of behavioral sciences in the Alcohol and Other Drug Studies program at San Diego City College. The AODS program is a fully accredited vocational training program for people who are studying to be certified alcohol and drug counselors in the state of California. Today, I am going to talk about active listening in group counseling. This lecture is called Active and Reflective Listening in Group Counseling, although the principles of active and reflective listening can be applied both in a group counseling setting as well as in an individual counseling setting, and applied to special types of settings like working with family members. So the essential idea is that clients will be most open to an intervention or to doing work in a session after feeling assured and confident that they're in the presence of someone who is listening and actively trying to understand them. The first step, often before any kind of clinical intervention, is the counselor demonstrating active and reflective listening techniques to ensure that the client feels heard. If group members do not feel heard and understood in a group counseling setting, they will inevitably shut down, become defensive, become reactive, or otherwise engage in less than productive group discussions. While fellow group members have some influence on this, it's the quality of the listening from the facilitator that will have the biggest impact on feeling heard by the group. So there are a number of reasons why members feel like they're not being heard. One is that literally the facilitator didn't hear what was being said and thus doesn't respond appropriately. More often, the facilitator doesn't acknowledge what was just said and moves on to someone else. So particularly in a group counseling session, someone may share something that feels very important to them and the facilitator says, okay, next, or, So Maria, I noticed you had something to say. So often then the person who's just shared that information without getting some kind of an acknowledgement feels like they weren't heard or they were dismissed. Another common reason why group members don't feel heard is when the facilitator has their own agenda. So if the facilitator is sitting there thinking, okay, well, like, when is it my turn to speak? I have something really important to say. Man, I really want to respond to what that client just said. It means you're not listening. And inevitably, as soon as the facilitator jumps in and takes their turn to speak, the group member probably doesn't feel as if they've been heard. Another reason why group members don't feel heard is because the facilitator assumes they already know what the speaker said or thinks or wants and jumps in, often looking something like, no, I understand. And now they just jump in with whatever it was that they were about to say. Typically in that situation, the person doesn't feel heard either. Many times, people don't feel heard when a facilitator gives advice without being asked. For example, somebody may be in a group setting and they're talking about a real life problem. Maybe a group member is saying something like, I'm just really concerned. I have a felony now on my record, because I got caught selling drugs and I don't know how I'm going to be able to get a job. And the facilitator immediately jumps in and says, well, you should try to get that felony expunged off your record. What it feels like for the speaker is that they weren't heard. Their concern wasn't heard. And now they're being told what it is that they're supposed to do. We talk about this a lot in the AODS program. It's particularly emphasized in motivational interviewing, which is one of the evidence-based practices that's considered primary for alcohol and drug counselors, that when people are given advice without being asked, they typically feel defensive, they feel shut down, or they feel like they have to justify themselves. So in this case, applying it to active listening, giving unsolicited advice usually serves to make the person feel as if they weren't heard. Or the facilitator may respond with an existing attitude or bias about what the speaker says, meaning that if the facilitator has an opinion about something that someone is sharing, then their response is probably going to make the person not feel heard. As another example, maybe somebody in group is saying something to the effect of, I don't really want to get a sponsor. I know that everybody says that you should do that, but, sponsors aren't really my thing. And the facilitator responds and says, well, sponsors are great. Everybody who gets sponsors tends to do really well. You're responding with an existing attitude or bias about the topic under discussion, and the speaker who is trying to say that they're not feeling so sure about sponsorship probably doesn't feel heard. Another way that group members don't feel heard is when the facilitator denies the speaker's feelings. This happens all the time, where somebody shares something that's painful or they're concerned about or they have anxiety about, and the facilitator says something like, oh, well, don't worry about that. It's not a big deal right now. You shouldn't feel bad. Well, it's okay. I wouldn't care if somebody did something like that to me. So the key question here is, what message are you really delivering with that kind of a response? It's a typical response. In many ways, people are socially and culturally conditioned to say things like that when people are expressing feelings that are considered negative feelings or strong anxiety-producing feelings. But what message are you delivering when you have that kind of a response? Usually the person feels as if they're not feeling heard or their feelings are being dismissed. So we combat this then by practicing active listening. Now, oftentimes when a facilitator thinks he or she is listening, they're not actively listening. The facilitator may be distracted. They may be thinking about what the client just said, meaning that they're no longer listening to what the client's saying right now, or the facilitator may be thinking about what he or she is going to say next. So in all of those cases, the clients are still talking, but the facilitator isn't hearing. So the goal of active listening is to give your full attention to the speaker, meaning there are no inner distractions. And what you're going to try to do is listen very hard to try and understand the message's meaning. What that means is that you're listening not only for the topic, what it is that the person is saying, but you're listening for the emotion behind what the person is saying as well. An important communication usually has two components: the content or the topic and the feeling or the attitude that's underneath the content, usually nonverbal. So active listening is an intent to listen for the meaning, which includes the entire message. For example, somebody in group may say, well, I didn't get another job again. I thought I was going to get this job. I really thought I was going to get this job, but I guess it's what everybody says. It doesn't really matter. Another one's going to come. So if the facilitator is simply listening to the content, what the person's saying, they might be like, oh, okay, well, it sounds like you didn't get the job, but you're listening to what everybody says, that it's not that big a deal, and another one will come. In that case, the person is probably not going to feel heard because there was a very important emotion that was underneath that. So when we're actively listening, we're not just listening to the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth. We are trying to hear the emotional message, which is usually going to be picked up through observation, nonverbal cues, body language, voice prosody, things like that. So when we're active listening, we're trying to listen for both. Now, in order to actively listen, it's a lot like a meditation practice in that you are trying to clear your mind of everything and simply focus all of your attention on the speaker. Now, that means suspending your own frame of reference, meaning if I am the counselor and I'm sitting back and I'm watching my group members and my frame of reference is I'm the facilitator, I'm paying attention to other people, I'm trying to see who's listening and who's not, and who I'm going to call on next, then I'm not actually focusing on the individual who's speaking. So we don't not only give our attention, our full attention, but we need to suspend any frame of reference. Basically, all I'm doing is focusing on you, what you're saying, and the emotions that you might be conveying. A great suggestion that a supervisor gave to me many years ago when I was in training was to maintain a state of curiosity and observation. We can do this as part of a mindfulness practice. We can look at almost anything and be curious about that. I could take this water bottle that I have sitting on my desk, and I've seen this water bottle a lot, but if I look at it and I'm curious about it, why is this water bottle green? Why did somebody paint it green? Why does it have two colors on the top where the spigot goes? What I'm doing in maintaining a state of curiosity is forcing myself to pay very close attention to whatever it is that I'm focusing upon. So with clients, we can do the same thing. When we maintain a state of curiosity in our observations about what this person's saying, we tend to suspend our reference and give all of our attention. We're going to avoid any other internal mental activities, meaning other stray thoughts about something, or wondering when this group is going to end, or thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. Those would be other internal mental activities. And very important, we need to suspend any judgment. We may have an opinion about what it is that the client's saying to us, but the minute we start thinking about our own opinion, we are now no longer actively listening to that person. So whatever judgment or thoughts we may have about what they're saying, we need to just take that and put that over here in the parking lot so we can maintain full focus on what the person's saying to us. Now, again, a big part of listening to the meaning of the message is making sure that we understand the emotion or feeling underneath that. So we're also going to watch for nonverbal cues, including voice tone, to see if we can identify the feelings. Part of actively listening is making sure that we encourage the speaker to continue. When we're really honed in on somebody, we're listening hard, and we're not speaking, the person may start to feel uncomfortable, like, whoa, what's this person doing? What's this facilitator doing? Are they hearing me? Why are they staring at me? So you often want to use body language to encourage the speaker to continue. So you're paying full attention, but you're doing things like, yeah, oh, wow. So these little comments that you're making encourage the speaker to continue while still allowing you to maintain full attention. And when we're doing active listening, we're not trying to memorize what the person's saying word for word. As soon as you try and memorize what they're saying, you're not listening to the person any longer. But what we are doing is trying to hold on to the gist or the summary of what it is that the person's been saying. Now, when actively listening, you avoid interrupting the speaker until they begin looping. Looping is a phrase that means that the person starts to repeat the same essential ideas. Often they're doing that because they don't feel heard by the listener yet. So maybe the person is telling us, I'll go back to the example I gave. Yeah, I didn't get the job. Man, I really wanted that job. You know, it's really frustrating because I feel like my felony is probably what's keeping people from hiring me. And man, I wanted that job. You know, like, I mean, I really thought I was going to get it. Now notice what's happened here is the speaker has said, I didn't get the job. I really wanted that job. I'm thinking my felony might be the reason why I didn't get that job. And then they're going back and repeating, man, I really wanted that job. I thought I was going to get that job. So now that's considered looping, meaning they've gone full circle and now they're looping back around and they're repeating the same thing again. So we listen actively until we hear the looping. As soon as we hear the looping, this is our cue that the person doesn't feel heard. And now what we're going to do is we're going to switch into reflective listening. So active listening, we're taking it in. Now, reflective listening means that essentially we're going to reflect back to the person what it was that we just heard. So reflective listening is one of the most important baseline skills that's needed by a counselor and a group facilitator. So when we're using reflective listening, we've actively listened for the content and the feeling behind what the client says, and now we're going to repeat it back to them. We use reflective listening for a number of reasons. One is we need to ensure that we heard him or her correctly and clarify if we didn't hear. But more importantly, we do this to make sure that the person feels heard and understood about what it was that they just said. So the goal of reflective listening is to grasp the speaker's point of view and convince the speaker that we understand their point of view, whether or not we agree with them. It was a very important statement I just said, and I want to say that again. The goal is to grasp the speaker's point of view, and now we have to convince them that we heard them, that we get it, we understand what it is that we're saying. Again, whether or not we agree with them, we need to first make sure that they feel heard. So the rule of thumb is that you can never fully trust that you understand what somebody's saying until you've confirmed it with the speaker. So I'll go back to the example again of the person that didn't get the job. And so he says, man, I didn't get this job, and I really thought I was going to get that job, and I think my felony is the reason why I'm not getting hired. And man, like, God, I really thought I was going to get that job. And so the facilitator is listening, and they say, like, okay, wow, it sounds like you wanted to get that job. Now, if I've got that right, the speaker is going to say, yeah. But if I didn't get that right, usually what's going to happen then is they're going to repeat themselves. And so they'll say, yeah, and it's the felony, man. I think the felony is what's holding me back. And so here it's very important. We try to confirm with the speaker that we understood what they're saying. They're disappointed that they didn't get the job. But in the act of confirming this, we actually got clarification that no, that's only part of it, but another big part of it is they're really concerned about the felony. Now, if we had just jumped forward with, oh yeah, I got it, I understand what they're saying, you know, they're concerned they didn't get the job, we didn't really fully understand them, and we wouldn't have known that had we not used reflective listening in order to confirm. So reflective listening, in essence, is simply repeating back what you actively heard or the meaning of the message, either during a natural pause or after using a strategic, graceful interruption. There's another lesson where we talk about graceful interruptions, but sometimes speakers keep going and they don't give you a natural pause. So they may start looping and there's no pause there. So my example again, man, I really wanted that job. I thought I was going to get that job. I think, man, the felony is what's holding me back. And man, I thought I was going to get that job. You know, like the dude was really listening to me, and I thought that he was like, you know, hearing me, and that he liked my resume, and I really thought I was going to get that job. And it's like, it's got to be the felony, man, and which sucks because I really liked that place. And you're waiting, right? And the client's looping, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to reflectively listen, but there's no natural pause. So in that case, you're going to need to use an interruption to cut in and now use reflective listening. But many times there also will be a natural pause where somebody will loop and then they'll, and in that moment we jump in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to repeat back to the speaker what it was that they just said. So we can paraphrase or use a more succinct version of this as long as you get the entire message. Meaning, again, that a reflective listening doesn't mean that we have to say every single word that the person just said. We just need to reflect back that we got the gist and understanding of that. Now, one of the things that can be used to let the person know that you're about to jump in and reflective listen is the use of what's called a tentifier. A tentifier is a signal to the person that you're about to repeat back what you just heard. That can be really helpful. It lets the person know, stop talking for a second, I'm about to let you know that I heard you. So tentifiers can be things like, okay, I hear you saying, or like, all right, it sounds like, so you believed, so you're confident that, by that you mean, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is, so these tentifiers are usually a way to get the person to stop talking and give you an opportunity to reflectively listen. Now, again, you don't have to repeat everything, just the main idea. But one technique you can use is you can mirror the last words, especially if it seems like the meaning behind that is really important. So if the person's telling you, man, I had a good feeling about this, and I went there, and I thought the guy really liked me, and like he was asking me questions about my resume, and man, I thought I was going to get that job, and like I really wanted that job, and I think the felony is the reason why I'm not getting hired. So what we're going to do is we're not going to repeat all that. We're going to say, wow, so sounds like you thought you were going to really get that job, but you feel like it's the felony is the reason why you're not getting hired. So what you're doing is you're giving the gist, but then you're repeating the last key phrase. Oftentimes people will feel more heard when you use their phrases or their words, especially when they're conveying the essential idea. So I'm tired of him pushing me around. Sounds like you're tired of being pushed around. That's mirroring. You can reflect the feelings then by making an interpretation. So you sound like, or if I'm hearing this right, and then you use whatever the feeling is behind it. So I'll go back to the person who's expressing wanting to get the job. So it sounds like you thought you're going to really get that job, and you feel like the felony is what's holding you back. And it seems like that's both frustrating to you and making you feel maybe a little disappointed. Yeah, I mean, talk about disappointed, exactly. So again, the reflective listen, the meaning behind it is not just the words, but it's reflecting the feeling. And sometimes if a lot has been said, then what you're going to do is you're going to do a summary. So we'll talk a little bit more about summary here in a second, but sometimes somebody may have been speaking for a good couple minutes, a lot. And so a summary is a form of reflective listening where you're going to say, wow, you just shared a lot there. Let me make sure I got all of it. And you're going to give the gist of the big share that the client just gave. So here's a written example of using reflective listening. So in this scenario, the speaker is upset about how his wife is ignoring him and pulling away and seems unsupportive in his recovery. So what you're going to do then is repeat and summarize what the person said and try to identify the feeling. So here saying, wow, that's a difficult situation. It sounds like your wife's being distant and it feels unsupportive to you. Those are the words, right, or the content. It also sounds like you're feeling hurt and maybe scared. And that then would be the feeling or the emotion behind it. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to yes. Now, I'm going to play an example video that's posted on YouTube of what reflective listening sounds like, because sometimes it's easier to see what it actually looks like in person than to just listen to me lecturing you about it. So let me switch over to that video now.
Well, I came in here because I'm having this problem at work. My boss seems to think that he can just push me around all the time, and I hate it. It makes me feel like crap. Your boss is being pretty bossy, and you hate the way that makes you feel. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I took this job because everybody told me it would be such a great place to work, and I was kind of pumped up about that, you know? This is just not what you expected. Not at all, when you first took the job.
So you notice that the doctor, our Dr. Puppet, is not repeating all of the words, but repeating back the gist of what the person is saying. So that's a very key point with reflective listening, because if we start worrying too much about capturing all the words, we're not listening any longer. So let's listen to a couple more examples.
Right. I mean, I'm not a child. I don't think I need to have someone breathing down my neck every minute of every day. He treats me like I'm a little puppet or something. Ugh. He thinks that just because you work for him, that gives him the right to be the puppet master and pull your strings all the time.
Now notice there, our puppet doctor is using a form of mirroring. So the client has just made a statement about feeling like he's being used as a puppet. And so what the doctor's doing is taking that key phrase and using it back.
Yeah, well, I get fired up pretty easily, and it's just about giving me an ulcer. Sometimes I just want to tell him to stuff it where the sun don't shine, you know what I mean? You're angry with your boss because you're feeling bullied by him, and that is really starting to get to you. Yeah, so I figured maybe I should come and talk to somebody. I mean, everybody says that you're pretty good at this motivational interviewing thing, and I've heard that it can help. You're sort of hoping that maybe I can help you to find a way to get better at pulling your own strings. Yeah.
Okay, so that's probably enough time listening to this. The link to this video is in the PowerPoint, and it goes on for a little bit longer, but you get the essential idea that the puppet doctor is repeating back what the person's saying, but he's also repeating back the feelings that are underneath this until he gets to a yes. All right, so let me stop this and we'll go back to the recording. We'll go back to the PowerPoint, sorry. All right. Now, if you're using reflective listening and you repeat back to the client and you make some kind of an interpretation about the meaning in the message and the client keeps talking, especially if they start repeating things again, then you miss the message. I gave you an example of this earlier where the client's saying, I thought I was going to get that job. Man, I really wanted to work at that place. I think the felony is what's holding me back. And maybe the counselor says in reflective listening, it sounds like you really wanted that job and you thought you were going to get it. Yeah, man. But it's the felony. Like, I think the felony is what's causing me problems. So in this case, you didn't get to a yes. You'll see this when you put this in practice. It's amazing how often when you're using reflective listening and a person feels heard, they will simply say that phrase, yes. Happens all the time, 85% of the time. So you're trying to get to yes, but if you don't get to yes and instead the person starts talking again, then you need to make sure you're listening again. And then what you're going to do is try it again. So, okay, I think I understand better now. And then you repeat whatever the additional message is. So I gave you an example here below, but I'll use the example that I was just doing. So the client says, I thought I was going to get that job. I really wanted that job. I think the felony's holding me back. I reflect back, wow, you really wanted that job and you thought you were going to get it. Client says, yeah, but I think the felony is the issue. Like, I can't get a job and it's because of my felony. Oh, I got it. So it's not just that you wanted to get the job, but you're feeling really upset that these felonies are holding you back. Yeah, exactly. So as soon as we get to yes, then we know that we've done it. So comparing the two are related but distinctly different. Actively listening is taking in. Actively listening means I am actively listening. I'm giving my full attention. I'm watching the person's body language and I'm listening to the words to understand them. I'm encouraging them to continue while I'm gathering in the information. Then reflectively listening is taking what I just gathered in and now I'm repeating it back or reflecting it back to the speaker to make sure that I've heard right and to demonstrate that I understand or clarify the message. And again, this is mirroring back what the person said or feels in order to promote awareness. Very important, one thing that reflective listening is not is problem solving, giving advice, or explaining. When somebody shares something and we try to solve their problems, this often stops the process of relating to the person, and the person usually doesn't feel heard. Now, this is a typical thing that an untrained or inexperienced clinician will tend to do. Somebody is going to share something that they have strong words or feelings about, and the untrained clinician is going to want to solve that. I'll go back to the example I've been using. I thought I was going to get this job. I really wanted this job. I feel like the felony's holding me back. And the facilitator says, well, have you thought about getting your felonies expunged? That's going to feel like a smack in the face to the person oftentimes. They're not going to feel heard or understood by that. And they often tend to feel defensive about this too. So when we're using reflective listening, we don't use any other intervention until we get to yes. So the clinician usually needs to fight that urge to try and problem solve or explain away or give advice for the client. So we need to avoid that. No opinion, no advice, no talking about your own experience. You're just going to keep repeating back what you've heard until you get to yes. Now, after you've reflected to the speaker and you get to yes, now you can bring forward another intervention. You still shouldn't be giving advice or trying to problem solve because that's going to shut the person down, and it's also not helping them figure out how to solve their own problems. But there are lots of other interventions that you can use. Typically, when somebody is sharing something that's really important and you use reflective listening, then you may ask for more information or get clarification about that subject. So I'll continue using my example. So thought I was going to get the job, really wanted the job, felony's holding me back. I reflectively listened. Sounds like you really wanted that job and you're frustrated because you feel like the felonies are holding you back. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, I'm wondering what that means to you. What would you like to see have happen here? Those types of questions is building on the understanding and moving into the more complex interventions. So we want to remember we're using reflective listening as a primary or first intervention. Then once we've got confirmation from the client that they feel heard and understood, now you can move on to other often more complex counseling interventions. All right, one last thing to talk about as it relates to reflective listening are summary statements. I mentioned those a little earlier in the presentation. So usually reflective listening is a brief, succinct intervention to reflect back something that the person just immediately has said, whereas summary statements are a larger, more encompassing type of reflective listening that's capturing a topic or a series of conversations. So the example that I keep using of wanted the job, didn't get it, felonies are holding me back, that's a pretty short expression from the client. So then we can just use reflective listening, repeat back what the person said, and then we move on. But sometimes there's going to be a lot more that the client's saying. And so now what we're going to need to do is just summarize a big piece of information into a much shorter version that captures either the essence of maybe a long drawn out topic, or there may have been a series of conversations. Maybe the client says something, the client says, thought I was gonna do the job, felonies holding me back. Another person says, yeah, I thought the same thing, dude, but as soon as I got my felonies cleared, that solved the problem for me. And then somebody else says, yeah, but I feel like getting your felonies cleared isn't all that easy, and you're letting the clients do some horizontal processing, which is good. And there's a pause, and now we're going to jump in, and we're not going to just reflect what everybody said individually, but we're going to use a summary statement. Okay, it sounds like what we're hearing here is that oftentimes felonies are holding people back from getting jobs that they thought they would have otherwise gotten, kind of like what you were saying over there, Juan, but that some of you have had some experience with getting felonies expunged, and others are wondering if you can get all your felonies expunged. Am I getting that right? We get head nods, yes, and now we move into the next intervention. So summarizing is reflecting the material back to the speaker in a way that captures the main points, but in a much shorter, more succinct, brief, and clear way. And what we're typically doing with a summary statement is we're gathering all this together as an opportunity to reflect on what was just said. Now, summary statements serve the same purpose to ensure that the clients feel heard, but summary statements are also going to try and move the conversation in some way. So when we're using a summary statement, we may be collecting and simplifying what was just said so that the conversation can move on or continue in that vein. We may need to clarify a number of statements that may have not been clearly related or are confusing. Many times when people are in early recovery in particular, they may not articulate very clearly. They may say something like, yeah, just like, just sucks, like, well, I thought I was going to get this job, and, like, God, I don't know, man. I'm just so frustrated with this. I just think my felonies are like a big problem. So in that case, the client said a lot, but it's kind of maybe confusing what they're saying or not really clear. And so here we may need to use a summary as a type of reflective listening to clarify that we understand what the client's saying before we encourage them to continue. Then other times, summaries can be used strategically to link or compare statements that are made at different times. This can be done both with individuals where you're comparing something they're saying now to something they said before, or sometimes that can be done between two different individuals. And summaries can also be used to signify a transition or a close of a topic. So let's talk about each of those. So the collecting summary is often used during a process of continuing to explore a particular topic. But maybe it's a lot of words have been said, or it's getting a little off track, or maybe people have been sharing on a topic. We're talking about felonies getting in the way of getting a job when you leave treatment. And it kind of falls over where somebody now is talking about, yeah, like my friend, she got her felonies expunged, and like, oh my God, that was like a big process. And, like, I mean, she actually was like, she was doing breaking and entering, and now the conversation is veering off into a discussion about somebody outside of the group. So here the facilitator may jump in and do a collecting summary. Yeah, so let me just pause there before we get too deep into what happened with your friend. I think what we're talking about here today is how to get a job and the process of trying to get felonies expunged, which some of you have had some success with and some of you have some anxiety about. And so I'm wondering if we can hear more about what's happened with the people here in this group. So that's a collecting summary, a type of reflective listening, where we're grabbing what everybody said and we're trying to bring it back on track and continue whatever the topic was. Or it may be with an individual, that the person has been speaking and they're starting to repeat themselves, or they're starting to get off track, and we say, okay, yeah, I hear you. You sound really upset about your coworker's relapse and how it's affecting your recovery. So what's the next step? I'm not clear exactly what you're saying. So what we're doing is summarizing and telling them to continue. So that's the collecting summary. The linking summary ties together what the speaker just talked about with something that was said earlier, either by that speaker or by another group member, and it may be in this session or in a previous one. And when we use a linking summary, what we're trying to do is encourage the speaker to think or reflect on the relationship between two items. Maybe the person who was so worried about getting a job, comes to group 2 weeks later and he's like, I got hired, I'm so happy, I've been this place, I think it's going to really work. And so we may say, wow, so you sound really excited that you just got hired and that this place, it sounds like you're really excited about and you feel like it'll be a good fit. I remember just a couple weeks ago, you were talking about not getting a job at a place that you also thought was a good fit, and you were feeling really depressed at the time. And so this is fantastic to see that you continued to try and push forward, and now look what's happened. So what we're doing is we're linking by summarizing what was said today, summarizing what was said a couple weeks ago, and in this case, we're doing that in order to encourage or reinforce the person for the efforts that they've made. Sometimes we can use this where somebody may say something and we use a linking summary. We say, wow, that's interesting what you're saying, Maria. That actually reminds me of something that Patrick was saying last week that seems very similar. What Patrick was saying was, and then we summarize what he said. And so here what we're doing is we're linking what two different people have said for some purpose. Sometimes linking summaries can also be helpful when somebody's ambivalent about something. They've expressed really wanting something, then they've expressed not wanting something. And so what we do is we gather those two things together and say, okay, well, on the one hand, it sounds like you feel that this way. And on the other hand, it sounds like you feel this way. And maybe we use that as we're about to develop discrepancy, which is a motivational interviewing technique and a separate lecture. And then the transitional summary is usually used by a facilitator to mark a transition or a shift from one focus to another, helping to close a process. So sometimes what may happen is we want to stop the one person who's been talking and engage other group members. And so what we may use is use a transitional summary to say, okay, yeah. So, wow, this has been really important as you've been sharing about your experience looking for jobs and how you got your felony expunged and now you got the new job. That's great. We're really, really happy, and I'm so glad you shared that. So I'm wondering if this is bringing anything up for other people in the group. So we use that transitional summary to let the person know we're closing off what you're saying and now we're moving on to someone else. Sometimes a transitional summary can be used to shift to a different topic. Maybe the facilitator says, wow, so we've been having a really important discussion today, about jobs and felonies. We've been talking about this for about the last 25 minutes, but I know in the beginning, Juan, you mentioned that you had something that you wanted to talk about today. So I'm wondering if we can turn to Juan and give you some group time so that you can bring this up. So that would be a transitional summary to move to someone else. And transitional summaries can also be really important at the end of a group where you let people know that you're about to bring the session to a close, where you jump in and, okay, so we've only got a couple minutes left, our time's running out. So let's review what we've covered today here in group. We talked about X, Y, and Z and how we shared that that relates to X, Y, and Z. That's a good place to pick up when we start next week. See you all next week. All right, so in summary, here's a little cartoon. This means it's not working. Hey, do you want to enjoy some music while you're not listening to what I'm saying? So that means you are not actively or reflectively listening. All right, so that takes us to the end of our presentation today on being an active listener. As I said at the very beginning of this presentation, active and reflective listening in this lecture was primarily focused on a group setting. But again, the same principles can and are used very much in an individual counseling session as well. I hope you found this presentation useful. Until next time.